Every day of your life, you are forced to navigate an invisible minefield. You step into offices, boardrooms, and family gatherings where the air is thick with a volatile psychological substance, the human ego. We like to believe we are surrounded by rational adults who make decisions based on facts, data, and mutual benefit. But the deeper you descend into the study of human behavior, the more you realize that most people are walking fortresses of insecurity, disguised as towers of strength. This is never more dangerous than when you are forced to deal with a high ego individual. These are the people who always have to be right, who treat every differing opinion as an act of treason, and who react to the slightest hint of correction with immediate explosive hostility. Most people handle these personalities by pushing back, fighting for their own point, or trying to conquer them with superior logic. But this is a fatal strategic mistake. When you attack a fortress directly, the gates slam shut, the archers take their positions, and any chance of true influence is permanently destroyed. Unfawn, Dale Carnegie understood that the ego is not a sign of genuine power, but a fragile shield protecting a deeply vulnerable core. He frequently reminded his students that we are not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion, bristling with prejudices and motivated entirely by pride and vanity. When a high ego person speaks to you from a place of intense arrogance, they are not acting out of supreme confidence, they are acting out of an evolutionary fear of losing their status. Their brain treats a loss of face exactly the same way it treats a physical threat to their survival. The moment you offer direct disagreement, their sympathetic nervous system floods their body with cortisol and adrenaline. Their analytical mind shuts down completely, replaced by a primal, defensive rage. If you want to influence them, you must learn to stop fighting their armor. You must learn the rare, magnificent art of bypassing their defenses entirely, entering the fortress not as an invading army, but as a welcome guest. And to master this high stakes diplomacy, you must first commit to a brutal truth. You cannot win an argument with a high ego person, even if you possess ironclad data, even if you expose their logic as completely flawed, and even if you leave them with no factual escape route, you have still lost the psychological war. Carnegie famously quoted an old adage that should be etched into the mind of every leader: a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. When you crush someone's ego in a verbal battle, they do not admire your intellect. They despise your victory. They will harbor a quiet, burning resentment that will bleed into every future interaction, silently sabotaging your projects, undermining your authority, and destroying your peace of mind. True social mastery means realizing that your own ego's desire to win. A petty argument is the single greatest obstacle to your long term success. Mate, the first step in speaking to a high ego person without triggering a crisis is a complete transformation of your internal posture. You must stop viewing their arrogance as a personal insult directed at you and start viewing it as a highly predictable biological reflex. When they're posturing, when they demand center stage, or when they speak with condescension, you must observe them with the cool, unbothered detachment of a seasoned psychologist. You do not absorb their tension, you map it. You realize that their hostile exterior is simply a loud, tragic cry for validation and importance. Once you step outside of your own emotional reactivity, you gain an untouchable advantage. You are no longer trapped inside their storm. You are the calm, grounded anchor, controlling the entire gravity of the interaction from the shadows. Now, this brings us to the core mechanism of Carnegie's wisdom. To change someone's mind, you must first stabilize their status. Which is so, before you can introduce a new idea, shift a strategy, or correct a massive operational failure, you must ensure that their sense of self importance remains completely uninjured. You must learn to construct an invisible bridge of absolute emotional safety, wrapping your ultimate strategic objectives in a language that protects their pride. By ensuring that their fortress walls never feel threatened, you disarm their evolutionary survival instincts. You create an environment where their ego can safely rest, allowing their analytical mind to return to the surface, ready to be guided exactly where you want it to go, without ever triggering a single defensive alarm. Okay. When you attack a fortress directly, the gates slam shut. But true social mastery means entering not as an invading army, but as a welcome guest. To successfully walk through the gates of a high ego persona's fortress, you must master the delicate art of status stabilization. Most people believe that the best way to deal with an arrogant individual is to humble them, to show them that they aren't as important or as brilliant as they think they are. But trying to strip a high ego person of their self awareness. Importance is like throwing a match into a room filled with gasoline. It triggers an immediate catastrophe. Dale Carnegie recognized that the desire to be important is one of the deepest, most insatiable cravings in human nature. When you encounter a highly defensive, ego driven personality, they are starving for that validation. If you withhold it, they will fight you tooth and nail to claim it. But if you deliberately, strategically feed that hunger first, their defensive posture dissolves and their psychological walls come crumbling down. Again, this requires the surgical application of what Carnegie called sincere appreciation. You must look past their abrasive exterior and identify a genuine strength, a real achievement, or a legitimate area of expertise that they possess. Once you find it, you shine a brilliant, hyper focused spotlight on it. You don't use vague, empty flattery. The high ego mind is hypervigilant and will instantly flag insincerity as a manipulative threat. Instead, you offer specific, grounded recognition. By validating their status right at the outset of the conversation, you pull off a magnificent psychological coup. You give their ego exactly what it wants, which allows their nervous system to drop out of fight or flight mode. You have effectively disarmed the guard at the gate. Think about how this dramatically alters the trajectory of a potentially volatile meeting. If an employee needs to pitch a completely new operational strategy to an old school, highly defensive executive, they don't open the conversation by pointing out how out of date the current system is. That would be an immediate, direct assault on the executive's legacy. Instead, the hypnotic communicator begins by stabilizing the executive's status. Sir, you built the foundational framework of this entire department, and your deep understanding of our core market is the reason we've survived this transition. Because you have such an institutional view of this company, I wanted to bring a new data model to you first to get your strategic perspective on it. Okay? Look at the profound neurochemistry at play in that opening. You have explicitly labeled the executive as the master, the builder, and the ultimate judge. You have given them a massive dose of psychological importance. Because their status is endowed, their brain doesn't treat your upcoming proposal as a threat or an insult to their intelligence. Instead, they view it as an opportunity to showcase their mentorship and wisdom. Their mind shifts from a state of aggressive defiance to one of expansive, patronizing curiosity. They are now actively prepared to listen to your ideas, not because they care about your data, but because listening to you makes them feel incredibly powerful and wise. Can This technique requires you to completely master your own biological impulses. When someone speaks to you with arrogance, your natural human reflex is to match their energy, to assert your own status, and to prove that you are just as smart or capable as they are. You must ruthlessly crush this urge. The moment you enter a status competition with a high ego person, you have lost control of the dynamic. You must be entirely willing to let them feel like the superior force in the room. Let them take the center stage. Let them wear the crown and let them believe they are the dominant authority. While their ego is basking in the warmth of your validation, you gain the quiet freedom to steer the entire conversation exactly where you need it to go. Okay. While their ego is basking in the warmth of your validation, you gain the quiet freedom to steer the entire conversation exactly where you need it to go. Once you have stabilized the high ego fortress with validation, you face the most dangerous phase of the interaction, introducing a perspective that contradicts theirs. If you make a direct statement like, the logistics team can't handle that volume, or that timeline is impossible, you instantly undo all your hard work. The high ego person will hear your statement as an open challenge to their authority. Their psychological armor will snap back into place, and they will fight your facts simply to protect their pride. To prevent this defensive reflex, the master communicator shifts from making declarations to asking questions. You utilize Dale Carnegie's favorite conversational tool, the humble Socratic method. Yes, this shift requires you to completely mask your own expertise dot, and reframe your objective as a request for their superior guidance. Instead of telling them what the problem is, you ask a question that forces their brain to discover the problem on its own. You lead them to the edge of the cliff and let them look over, rather than pushing them. Because their ego is naturally driven by a desire to look brilliant and all knowing, they will eagerly jump at the chance to solve a puzzle you present to them. You are transforming what could have been a hostile confrontation into an intellectual mentoring session. Okay? Think about how this alters the verbal script. If a volatile client demands an immediate software rollout that you know will crash the servers, an amateur responds with logic. We can't do that because the infrastructure isn't ready. The client digs in, demanding it anyway. The hypnotic listener uses the Socratic shift instead. They look at the client with deep respect and ask, your vision for this rollout is incredibly aggressive, and I love the speed. With your experience in scaling operation, how do you think we should mitigate the risk of a server dot overload on launch day if we bypass the final testing phase? Notice the incredible sophistication of this phrasing. You haven't told the client their timeline is bad. You have asked them how to solve a technical bottleneck. By doing this, you force their mind to simulate the future failure. But because they are doing the thinking, they don't feel attacked. They will look at the issue, realize the risk, and say, well, perhaps we should take an extra week for testing to ensure the servers hold. You have achieved your exact operational goal, yet the client feels like the absolute mastermind who saved the project from disaster. Okay, to execute this level of influence, your vocal tone must be completely free of sarcasm, condescension, or hidden smugness. The high ego mind has a highly tuned radar for passive aggression. Your questions must flow from a place of calm, genuine curiosity. You must be completely comfortable letting them teach you the solution that you already knew hours before the meeting started. By using the inquisitive hook, you let them maintain the illusion of absolute control, proving once again that true power is never loud, never forces its way through, and never needs to take the credit. Okay? You force their mind to simulate the future failure, letting them find the solution so they feel like the absolute mastermind who saved the day. When you have successfully guided a high ego individual to see a problem using the Socratic method, you arrive at the psychological turning point of the conversation. They have identified the issue, and they may even be on the verge of proposing the exact solution you desired all along. However, a major obstacle remains: their desperate need for absolute ownership. If they sense for even a fraction of a second that you are trying to take credit for the breakthrough, or that you are secretly thinking, "I told you so," their defenses will instantly lock back down. They will abandon the new strategy simply to avoid giving you a public victory. To finalize your influence, you must deploy one of Dale Carnegie's most brilliant principles of leadership. You must effortlessly let the other person think the idea is theirs. In the high stakes theater of human behavior, true masters of social intelligence do not care about receiving immediate applause. They understand that applause is a shallow transactional currency that feeds the fragile ego but drains actual power. The hypnotic communicator is entirely willing to let the high ego person steal the spotlight, wrap themselves in the glory of the new strategy, and present it to the world as their own personal stroke of genius. You don't fight for ownership, you actively engineer it. You take the subtle insights they handed to you during your periods of intense listening and you mirror them back as the brilliant foundation of the final plan. Okay? Think about the exact linguistic phrasing required to execute the seamless transfer of credit. When they finish speaking, you don't say, "Exactly, that's what I was trying to tell you." Um, Instead, you look at them with absolute respect and say, "That is incredibly profound. The way you just connected our operational capabilities to that market trend completely changes our trajectory." It reminds me of the insight you shared earlier about maximizing efficiency. Yeah. If we execute this plan based on your framework, we can scale this project seamlessly. So, okay. Look at the masterful alchemy at play within that statement. You have taken your ultimate goal, wrapped it entirely in their identity, and handed it back to them as a golden legacy. Because they now believe the strategy is a direct reflection of their own brilliance, they will defend it with fierce, unyielding dedication. They are no longer just approving a suggestion, they are protecting their own intellectual child. They will mobilize resources, crush institutional bureaucracy, and push the project forward with an intensity that no amount of external pressure could ever replicate. You have won the long term war of execution by simply surrendering a short term battle of credit. Ignite. This level of control requires an almost superhuman suppression of your own pride. It means sitting quietly in the room while they present your ideas to the executive board or the team, absorbing the praise that rightfully belongs to you. But as you watch them bask in the warmth of that public validation, you can smile inwardly with absolute confidence. You realize that while they are wearing the heavy, fragile crown of public authority, you are the one quietly holding the actual strings of power from the shadows. You have mastered the highest evolution of charisma, shaping human destiny entirely from the background, proving that the ultimate leader is never the loudest voice in the room, but the one who seamlessly scripts the minds of those who speak. While they're wearing the heavy, fragile crown of public authority, you are the one quietly holding the actual strings of power from the shadows. When you reach the final peak of this psychological discipline, your entire relationship with difficult personalities undergoes a profound transformation. You no longer walk into meetings with a sense of dread. And you no longer view a high ego boss, a volatile client, or an arrogant colleague as a frustrating obstacle to be avoided. Instead, you see them for what they truly are: beautifully predictable systems of human emotion waiting to be stabilized. You realize that mastering the art of speaking to a high ego person is not about using clever verbal manipulation or acting submissive. Uh, s- s- it is about providing a rare, unshakable sanctuary of absolute composure. Okay. This is the ultimate luminous heart of Dale Carnegie's philosophy. He did not teach us to understand human nature so that we could navigate the world as cold, calculating actors playing a part. He taught us, that when you actively choose to protect another person's dignity, you are exercising the highest form of emotional maturity. When a high ego individual storms into a room, throwing their weight around, desperate to assert their dominance, most people react by becoming defensive, matching their toxic energy, and escalating the conflict. But the hypnotic communicator meets that emotional tempest with a profound, unbothered stillness. You become the immovable gravity well in a room full of chaotic, spinning objects. Okay? The power of non reactivity. The moment you stop reacting to a high ego person's provocations, you instantly take control of the interaction. Arrogance relies entirely on friction to feed itself. When you refuse to provide that friction, their momentum collapses. Okay. By maintaining your poise, breathing deeply, keeping your posture relaxed, and allowing your eyes to reflect a genuine, warm interest rather than defensive judgment, you do something magnificent. You absorb their emotional chaos without being infected by it. The high ego person subconsciously senses that your internal security is entirely untouchable. They realize that they cannot trigger you, intimidate you, or force you into a status battle because you are the only source of absolute safety and validation in their orbit. Their nervous system begins to sync with your composure. Their arrogance softens into respect, and they find themselves inexplicably drawn to your counsel. Okay, good. As you carry this cinematic blueprint back into the fast paced, high stress realities of your daily life, remember the invisible rules of the game. Let the loud voices fight for the center stage. Let the fragile egos scramble for the title of mastermind, and let the world believe it is being run by those who make the most noise. While they are busy defending their temporary fortresses of pride, you will walk through the world with the quiet, untouchable confidence of a master strategist. By protecting their dignity, sharing your own human flaws, asking the questions that grant them autonomy, and allowing them to claim the public victories, you gain the ultimate prize, the unshakable power to shape reality entirely from the background. The doors will open, the defenses will melt away, and you will lead them exactly where they need to go, simply because you mastered the profound, silent discipline of letting them wear the crown. By protecting their dignity and letting them wear the crown, you gain the ultimate prize, the unshakable power to shape reality entirely from the background.